Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Ryan. Today's video a little bit different. Normally I'm doing whiskey reviews or whiskey history or talking about current events, stuff like that. Today, a little bit different. I was told that I should check this video out. This is Bourbon Real Talk. If you're not familiar with these guys, it's a great channel, very informative. Tend to be a little bit more connected with news and information and have relevant sort of topical information to share within the whiskey community. Definitely recommend you check the channel out, Bourbon Real Talk, and obviously way more successful channel than mine is by a landslide. So they've been around and doing this for a very long time. But anyways, I was told to check this video out, so I'm going to do a sort of like a live reaction to this topic that they're going to be discussing in this video. I have not watched this yet, so this is going to be authentic first take here, but the title of the video is something along the lines of, are whiskey YouTubers full of crap, right? Are whiskey YouTubers full of crap? Are they BSing it? I think it's an interesting topic for sure. I have watched my fair share of whiskey YouTubers over the years, so I certainly have my own thoughts here, but I thought this could be an interesting thing to talk about and kind of piggyback off of their video, see what they have to say, and treat this as sort of a dialogue, even if it is a sort of one-way conversation where I'm talking and responding to the things that they're saying. But let's dive right into this, and let's see what they have to say about whiskey YouTubers and if they're full of crap.
So Wes, recently I was talking with a group of whiskey enthusiasts, and they started asking me questions about other whiskey tube channel hosts and what I thought about them. And some of them were kind of shocked at my opinion of some of the other channels. So it got me to thinking, maybe I should do an episode about whether or not the other channels are full of So if you want to hear about it,
because you know what today is? National Thank a Patron Day.
That's every day in my life.
Thank a patron day, huh?
We want to thank our faithful patrons, and when those names you see,
Imagine being a whiskey YouTuber and plugging your Patreon within the first minute of the video. Who would do such a thing? I certainly wouldn't do that about our Patreon. It has the link in the description, and if you join, you can get access to our Discord and our Patreon lounge there and get into conversation with some really cool people who are sharing samples, doing bottle shares and other tasting events and things of the sort. But I would never promote that within the first minute of my video. For shame, guys.
All right, so disclaimers, okay? First off, when we talk about someone being full of crap, we're talking about opinions, right? And whether or not their opinion is a valid opinion. And then the second thing is, and this is the one that people are most curious about, is their persona in alignment with their real personality, or are they kind of a fraud?
Yeah, are they faking it online?
All right, so right off the bat, we've got the two things that they're laying down as the criteria for the conversation today. The two things. The first is the opinion of the whiskey YouTuber valid? I think it's a fair question to ask. You know, I think it's a tough line to toe. You want to say that everybody is entitled to an opinion, but we're also lying if we say that everybody's opinion is of equal value on a topic, because my opinion on gymnastics is probably worth dog water because I don't know jack friggin' squat about gymnastics, right? And the same thing applies here when it comes to whiskey YouTubers. A lot of times you're going to have people offering opinions and insights on topics they may not be totally up to speed on. Totally a valid thing to say, well, let's weigh the quality of their opinion. I think everybody should do that when you're watching a whiskey YouTube video or any other YouTube where somebody's giving insights at all. You always need to consider the source and ask the question, how valid is their opinion? How do we quantify a valid opinion? Well, you certainly want somebody to show some degree of understanding and expertise in that field. The second thing is their persona real? Now, this one to me is not as important. Can I just be frank with you guys? As a viewer, I don't care if the person that I'm watching is like this in real life. You know, sometimes a YouTuber, and as somebody, if you're not familiar with my other channel, my main channel, over 300,000 subscribers, we are in the gaming sphere, and a lot of the YouTubers that I've rubbed shoulders with in that space, they are not quite the same in real life as they are on camera. Why? Because they need to be charismatic, they need to be outgoing, a little bit, not over the top, but they need to be engaging, and sometimes that takes 2 to 3 takes. You know what I mean? Just to get that delivery right on something that they're working on in a YouTube video. So for me personally, are they a carbon copy in real life of what I'm seeing on screen? I don't really care that much about that. Sure, I want somebody to be authentic when it comes to just their core values, but persona doesn't matter to me.
And so I thought this was interesting because when it comes to bourbon opinions, you know, the analysis of bourbon is relatively new.
In general, laymen offering opinions on products and stuff like that is, as a whole, a relatively new thing because of the way that social media has blown up over the years. So definitely understand that take.
But when you think about like analysis of alcohol, there is a mature category of alcohol that has a universally accepted body that determines when somebody is actually qualified to comment.
Yeah. Sommeliers?
Sommeliers, that's
Yeah.
right. So, but when you start researching sommeliers, you realize that it's all kind of made up.
Right.
Okay. So basically, the Court of Master Sommeliers was formed in 1977 in England.
Okay.
You know,
Where-
the world's number one
capital of wine is.
wine production. Now,
So if you're not familiar with sommelier, my understanding is that sommelier or sommelier, I don't know if the correct pronunciation on it, but you can actually get like training and certification to be a certified wine snob who can give, make recommendations, curate wine lists, and things of the sort.
now they're probably the capital of wine consumption.
Right, yes.
But yeah, they're not really known for wine production.
It's not like in
So
Napa
that-
Valley or France
Right.
or somewhere
Right.
like
That shocked me. I assumed it would be in.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to think about that. You know, the UK, I think England, they're not really known for any particular export, right? They're an island nation that's fairly flat, and there's not a lot of natural resources there, which is why the whole Brexit thing was such a big deal, because most of their goods are imported. I always have to chuckle when I think about this conversation. I think it was between Gordon Ramsay and what's a big guy's name? Robert Irvine. That's who it was, Robert Irvine. But anyways, so Robert Irvine and Gordon Ramsay were having a conversation. Gordon Ramsay, I think it was Irvine said, in England we're not really known for our cuisine, and Gordon Ramsay got a little offended. He's like, well, hold on, we've got so many like Michelin, the 4-star restaurants, and Irvine goes, yeah, what kind of food do they serve? And Ramsay goes, French. And they both laughed about it. It's true. England's not really known for their wine either when it comes to what they're making.
France or Italy or
Isn't
something.
sommelier a French word or something? Sounds like it.
The word has an origin. It had to do with the person that packed beast of burden.
Okay.
And then later it was used as the person that made like recommendations in the restaurant. And so it's actually kind of a interesting, what's it called?
Etymology.
Research the history.
Etymology is the word he's looking for.
But up until they created this, sommelier designation, people who wanted to comment on wine just had to build their personal reputation, and people decided whether or not they trusted them or not.
Yeah.
And now sommeliers are able to kind of rely on the social credit of the reputation associated with the title, right?
Yeah.
And right now, there's no universally accepted whiskey designation, although there are several contenders that are trying to create it. So right now, the whiskey world is just like pre-1977 for wine, where individuals have to build their own reputation. And taste is very subjective.
Absolutely, it
There's
is.
all kinds of genetic anomalies. You've heard of the cilantro gene.
Right, yeah, and you've got it, right?
I don't have
Or
cilantro.
no, you have the Flintstone vitamin thing.
Yeah.
This is funny. Yeah. So taste is subjective. Absolutely. He's referencing the cilantro gene. My wife's like that. Cilantro tastes like dirty dish soap to her, which is a shame because I love cilantro and onion on any street taco I have. But absolutely, yeah. Taste is subjective. I've learned that over the years because I would consider myself to be relatively well seasoned in terms of my palate now. I've had a very wide variety of whiskeys, much in thanks to my community too. I think I had a very small selection of whiskeys I was familiar with until I started doing the YouTube thing, and a lot of people would send in samples from things off their shelf, from distilleries local to them. They would send me samples from allocated bottles I hadn't found yet. And then over the course of these last few years, my sort of palate repertoire has grown quite a bit. So I would consider myself to have a fairly well-seasoned palate, at least at this point, in terms of the variety of whiskey that I've tried. And I can pick things out now in a way that I wouldn't have been able to years ago. That being said, my palate is not the same as everyone else's palate, and I've learned this because some people will say, this is so good, you gotta buy it. I love it. And I know that they're a reliable, whiskey source. For example, I've learned over the years that Fred Minnick and I have very different palates, because there's some stuff that he's like, this is in my top 5 list. And I try it and I'm like, it is? For real? You know what I mean? Driftless Glen, that's who it was. He was like really big last year on Driftless Glen's bourbon. And I was really unimpressed by it. And there's stuff of theirs I really like. I mean, I like their bourbon de Raja, the orange, I think it's like orange sherry infused or something like that. That stuff's pretty good. But their standard, like, barrel strength bourbon, I was not impressed by personally. And he was raving about it. So, yeah, absolutely. You can't just discount somebody because they like something you don't like. That's very common in whiskey.
But yeah, there's all these different kinds of, genetic, predispositions that you're born with, and you
For sure.
like tasting notes that people are like, what in the world? You're tasting soap out of cilantro?
Right.
And I'm like, no, yeah. I don't know. I don't understand that at all because I luckily don't have that.
Yeah, I would die if I had the cilantro. Yeah. So the other thing, and this is, I think, why people ask the question, like, are these people full of shit? Is because sometimes tasting notes can be used to educate the listener of the tasting notes, and sometimes it can be used to elevate the taster. Right. So you might be saying, like, all of these, like, esoteric kinds of things because you want to seem like
what was it? Indian
nutmeg.
Yes.
Yeah. I made that up.
East
I don't
Indian
even
nutmeg.
I don't even know if they make nutmeg in East India, but I was just trying to be silly.
I totally get what he's talking about here. Yeah, tasting notes are a really interesting thing because he's absolutely right. There's on one side of it, you have here's what I'm getting out of it. And that is purely based off of personal experience. He's absolutely right. So the way you grew up, the cuisine you're used to having, the beverages you're used to drinking. So we tend to describe whiskey tasting notes in terms of things that we do understand because your brain's trying to reach out and make connections like that reminds me of this thing I've had. That reminds me of that thing I've had. And so when we're tasting the whiskey and we are naming tasting notes, that's really when it's authentic, that's what we're doing. It's our brain is reaching out and latching on and saying that flavor is familiar because it reminds me of this. And that is a tasting note that we offer. It's bitter and dark, kind of reminds me of coffee grounds, you know what I mean? And so we describe it based on our own experiences. But your experiences may be quite different. In fact, I remember, I think it was my Russell's 15. This is the first time I've had a comment this nasty, but I had my Russell's 15 review this year, which got a lot of traction for the size of my channel. And so that brings in fresh eyes. And there was a lady who was extremely upset with me, and she was swearing up and down. She said he's full of expletives, and it doesn't taste anything like the things he's saying. I get this and this. And I'm like, it's just based off of what my brain is making connections to. We're not just making things up, This just happens to be the bridges that my brain was building while I was tasting Russell's 15. And she did not agree, and she had some very mean-spirited things to say about that. But on the other side, you then also have people who want to sound sophisticated. And so they will name tasting notes that are maybe tangential to what they really mean. Maybe what they're thinking is, I'm just getting a lot of vanilla and caramel. And so they're trying to, dulce de leche cheesecake. And you know what I mean? And they're kind of taking it down a rabbit trail to end at something that sounds more impressive than the first thing they thought of. And that's something that, as a whiskey taster and reviewer on YouTube, I have to be cautious about for sure. Because I think that it's a very easy thing to do. I don't think that it's always a malicious thing or it has ill intent, like you're trying to be deceptive, you're trying to sound hoity-toity. I just think it's a really easy trap to fall into as a taster in general because you don't want to just call it something basic when maybe you feel like you ought to give it a more precise name. And so you start going down a rabbit trail of, is what I mean by caramel more like this or more like that? Is it maybe like a Milky Way candy bars or chocolate element to it? So you take something that's very simple and you try to make it very complex to do it the whiskey justice. And I don't think it's always a malicious thing or has ill intent, but it is a thing that happens.
So the short answer is that these people that you're seeing online, they might be full of shit. And for somebody else, they might be full of wisdom here. So what I recommend you do with regard to someone's opinion of how whiskey tastes is watch some reviews that they did of something that you're extremely familiar with, and if their
sure.
align with your experience, it's likely that you can trust them when they're giving you review notes on something you have not tasted.
Sure.
Now let's talk about the other one that people are probably more interested in, and that's whether or not people's personas are fake.
Yeah.
Okay.
This should be interesting.
And I've been lucky enough to interact with many of the other whiskey content creators, and I've learned that some people in the whiskey world, or just in life in general, are predisposed to something I call assuming negative intent. Okay. And what happens when you're assuming negative intent is you get a bit of information about a person, and your brain is able to extrapolate an entire explanation that assumes negative intent, and you interpret that thing totally negatively, and you see that person as a negative person and in a negative light.
Yep.
And that is a problem for somebody like me who's not a celebrity, but now all of a sudden I'm putting this content out and I'm exposing myself to individuals that assume negative intent to be able to hear what I'm saying and go, you know, people have said terrible things about me.
Right.
Like the only reason he does this is he's trying to find a way to profit off of his brother's suicide. Right?
Yeah.
Oof. No, I totally get that. Like I mentioned earlier, my primary content is in the gaming space, and the amount of negativity that I've received there, I totally understand what he's talking about, because there's days where you just put out a video that you think, hey, it's a pretty good video. I think I really stand behind the content. I stand behind the meaning. I stand behind, the advice I'm trying to give here. And then someone will come in with an accusation of some kind, like you're shilling. Like it's impossible to like something without somebody calling you a shill or assuming that this person is paying you. So if I say in a video, I really like this video game, they will ask you, okay, well, how much money did the developer of this video game pay you to say that? You know what I mean? And that's kind of on the grand scheme. And then sometimes it gets more specific and it gets more personal. I've had things where I just make a statement and somebody will respond. I've had this many times. How can you call yourself a Christian? There's no way you're a good father and husband if that's the way you talk or think. And you get all these personal attacks. They're getting called a shill, no big deal. That's water off a duck's back. I get called a shill a dozen times a day. But it's the more personal things that you try to say, I'm not going to let that bother me, and then come nighttime, you're laying in bed and you're like, I can't believe what a horrible thing to say. You know what I mean? It sticks with you sometimes. You got to have to try to learn to juggle that. And he's absolutely right. There are definitely people, I don't know if I would call it the same thing or give it the same name, but like the lens that they're seeing you through is a lens that assumes negativity, kind of like he's talking about. And I totally resonate with that.
And I'm like, wow, that is a major mental leap for you.
Right.
And I feel like if you just sat down with me and we had a drink together,
Sure,
you would not be assuming things like that about me.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's been infinitely worse in the past year too, with the election. I don't know about you guys, but I don't think that's limited to YouTubers or influencers. I think that's all of us have had to deal with that. Like there's this new lens that people are seeing you through where it's so polar, where it's either you vote like I do or you are close friends with Satan himself. And there's no in between. And I feel like in a lot of ways, I think social media does this, is it polarizes people based on like dichotomies, dualisms, where it's you either this or that. And if you're this, you're good. If you're this, you're evil. And there's nothing in between. I think it's because it's taking out that personal interaction. And like he's talking about, if you would just sit down with the person, you might find that you have a lot more in common outside of these two things that you're basing your entire perception off of. Whether it's an opinion on a whiskey, an opinion on a video game, an opinion on a political matter, whatever it may be. But there's a lot more to life than just two things. And you can't quantify somebody's entire quality of their person based on if this, then that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or you think like, oh, this guy deserves an Oscar. He's the best actor in the world. To be able to hide all of that evil whenever you're things, right?
Yeah.
So I have found that in my interactions with other content creators that they have been surprisingly accessible and also willing to help. Yeah. Now, a few of them have snubbed me. Yeah. Whenever
for shame,
I reach out to them and they've decided not to respond for whatever reason. But I understand that people are busy, and some people have had those negative experiences of interacting with other individuals and decide, hey, I'm not going to respond to this type of stuff because it hasn't worked out for me in the past.
Yeah, I get that either way.
I'm trying not to be hateful towards any of those channels that I've reached out to for whatever reason and they've ignored me. But generally speaking, they are the exception and not the rule.
Right. Yeah, there have been some great ones who have responded, right? And we've
Absolutely. Right? I've had zero negative experiences with anybody who I actually interacted with.
Right.
Trenton from SLB Drinks, it's been a pleasure to interact.
Love the SLB guys.
Kenny and Ryan from Bourbon Pursuit are shockingly humble, but I did want to deal with Fred Minnick separately.
Oh, interesting.
And the reason for that is, if you guys are familiar with Fred Minnick's content, he often wears an ascot. And he does so because Peggy No Stevens of the famed No family, who has been a consultant for many distilleries and kind of a mentor to Fred, recommended to him early on in his career that he have something that would, help people remember him and
distinguish him, sure.
Other people. And she was the one that encouraged him to wear the ascot.
Cool.
Okay. And so now that's kind of become his thing. And his backstory is kind of a heartbreaking one. He served in the military. And when he got out, he had PTSD. And part of his counseling was that he needed to get extremely focused on sensory experiences when he's in public places so that he doesn't have an anxiety attack. His vocabulary is a little bit broader than mine and most. He's
using fancy words.
He uses fancy words. He has more sophisticated tasting notes. But coming from the wine world, that's more normal, right? And his appearance kind of makes him a target because he does have this look,
Sure, people could see that as being hoity-toity, stuck up, sure.
And so it's real easy for those people to attack him. Fred came to my defense.
Yeah.
He ended up giving me his personal cell phone number.
Wow. Awesome.
And when I first started getting a little bit of attention on the show, I got the opportunity to interview Fred one time. When I was talking with him, he shared some very personal information with me. I
will say in content creation, in my experience, having solid mentors has been a big part of it for me too. I mentioned Fred Minnick earlier. I respect the heck out of Fred Minnick, and I watch a lot of his content. Like I did mention earlier, I have noticed that he and I taste things quite differently and have different preferences. But his notes, I think, are very accurate. Like when he and I disagree, when I'm like, I don't like this whiskey and he does like it, we often share very similar tasting notes about that bottle. And he just happens to enjoy those things more than I do. And that's very common in whiskey. But that aside, this is a really cool anecdote from him because it reminds me of some of my earlier times in content creation in the gaming space. Some of the people who have influenced my content and my success would be, I think of guys like Dr. Lupo. He and I used to stream together like 2 days a week, every week for like a year and a half straight. Great guy, phenomenal guy, and his success has just absolutely blown up, and he is very genuine and just a kind person. But he has always offered insights when I ask and advice when I need it, and he'll still check in every now and then and make sure people are doing okay, and I respect the heck out of him for it. Also, a creator named M-Tashed, Mike Tash from Canada, but he's a creator as well, and he and I used to spend a lot of time streaming together as well back in the day. His content just skyrocketed with the release of a certain game, and he has always circled back whenever I have questions about algorithm stuff, search engine optimization. And so a lot of these guys, like when you talk to them on a personal level, they are so ready to help, so ready to be a mentor and offer their expertise and their insight whenever you need it. I remember one time I was at an event in LA for a game that was releasing, and since I knew Dr. Lupo, I sat down with him at a table, and then one of his buddies came up who was not nearly as big as they are now, but he was still already on the rise. Guy you might know by the name of Tyler Blevins, aka Ninja. Sat down and I started asking him questions because I knew he was on the rise, and I was like, do you mind if I ask you a couple of quick questions, and brought up some stuff about my content and my struggles and what my goals were. This guy gave me like a full 15 minutes of his time. He bought my dinner as we were sitting at the table. He's like, your burger's on me. He bought me a burger and a beer. He probably doesn't even remember this. But he gave some great actionable feedback that I took notes on and immediately went home and implemented. And it wasn't it wasn't a year after that my content had grown enough that Facebook Gaming, when they launched their new platform, they wanted successful creators, and my growth was so so good at the time, they offered me a wicked contract to come and help them expand their platform. So I did that for a year. So anyways, a lot of these guys are very genuine, for sure, when you get them in a more personal space.
So Fred Minnick is 100% legit.
Yeah.
And I've had the personal interactions to know that. So in conclusion, whiskey opinions, you can take them, you can leave them, find somebody you can agree with, and then you can roll with that on an ongoing basis. With regard to personas, I can honestly say there's zero reason to believe that anybody isn't exactly who they say they are online. Yeah. All of my interactions have indicated to me that people are legit and they have good intent.
I would agree. That's probably true in the whiskey space. Being a creator that's sort of a hybrid, I can say in the gaming space, that is definitely a real thing where you have personas, big personas and big bravado on screen, and then you get them in a more personal environment. Some people are much more reserved then. Not all of them. I think there are exceptions. They're not the rule. Most people are pretty much the same. But I have definitely encountered some people who I've been really disappointed with. I've had people who portray a very positive and uplifting sort of a persona on screen, and then you get them behind closed doors and you'll hear slurs come out of their mouths and just really nasty talk, and it's a bit of a disappointment for sure. And I've had to sort of rectify that and come to terms with that in my mind when it comes to the gaming world. The whiskey world is very different, though. It's very different, and I have learned that in my couple of years of doing the whiskey YouTubing thing. And a lot of these people are more community focused and less gotta grind, gotta grow, gotta make money, right? The gaming space is gotta grind, gotta grow, gotta make money, gotta compete to get my video out first. The whiskey space, whiskey is a game of patience at its core, right? At its core, we're often tasting a spirit that the wood for the barrel had to grow for decades. And then it spent some time in a lumber yard seasoning, and then it went to a cooper to make a barrel. The spirit itself is raising grain from the dirt, and then it's malting and milling and distilling, and then putting it in a barrel and letting it age for another decade. And then you bottle it, and then it gets on a truck, and then it sits at a store until you pick it up off the shelf. This is often a spirit that has sometimes a century. Some of the ingredients, some of the things in there are over a century old. That's crazy to think about. Some of the wood itself and the wood sugars and the oak sugars that came out of it. Man, the tyloses that were broken down in the process, some of that stuff goes back a century, which is wild and mind-boggling. And I think that whole idea of patience has seeped into the whiskey community as a whole. We don't always have to have it now, and it doesn't always have to be a very super hyper sensational experience. And so because of that, I think these whiskey YouTubers and influencers, I don't even like using that word for them because they don't kind of follow the same shtick as other genres of influencers and content creators, which are all about the clicks and the engagements and what do I have to do to get them. I will say this, obviously, I think there are exceptions, and I think people sometimes perceive titles and thumbnails as clickbait. But one of the things you have to remember, like even the title of this video, which is Our Whiskey YouTubers Full of Crap, that is definitely a somewhat sensationalized title that is intended to make you like see it and want to click on it and hear what they have to say, right? That's not clickbait because it's not disingenuous. That is the topic of this video. That is the question that they are discussing. That is the topic that they are unpacking. So it's not disingenuous, but they can't title it something bland or blasé. And I get this a lot of times with my videos where they're like, oh my gosh, this is clickbait. But it's like, it's true though. The title is not misleading. Everything that's in the title is represented in the video itself. Now, are the words maybe hyperbolized a little bit? Are they a little bit more sensational just on the this is just getting you in the door. This isn't the content itself. This is just making you want to come in and see what's going on. We have to analyze things like search engine optimization, algorithm, Google Trends, what words are people clicking on, what titles are people clicking on, what kinds of thumbnails are people clicking on. So a lot of that stuff is actually just, it's just the cover of the book. And how are we going to make the cover of the book appealing enough that you're going to want to open it and at least give the first page a read and see if this is the kind of thing you want to engage with. So while the title of this video is a little bit sensational, it's not a lie. It's not misleading. That is the topic of the video. Now, it may be a little brash and a little in your face, but that's just the cover of the book to see if you're interested in the topic, right? So a lot of people confuse those two things, and they think that a sensational title or a thumbnail is misleading or that it is fraudulent in some capacity. And I just don't think so. We just have to play the game, right? We just have to play the game.
And they do want to build connection and community around whiskey, just like I do. And so, just find somebody you vibe with and assume positive intent.
Yeah.
Don't spread negative information about people that you don't have direct knowledge of.
Sure.
And
I mean, this is, from my perspective, since my faith and the church is a big part of my life, I kind of view the whiskey world the same as I view the church. Mm-hmm. Like, you need people from all different walks of life who are going to appeal to all different types of people. That's the beautiful thing about creation, is that we're all made differently on purpose, not so that we can appeal to everyone, but so that we can appeal to those people who need us to appeal to them. Don't hate on someone just because you don't particularly find their information or their channel appealing to you, because they are appealing to someone, and they're also putting their hard work and time into this. Yep. That's my take on it.
And resources. I mean, this podcast lost money for its first 4 years, I think. So.
Yeah, I get that. All right, well, that's basically the content of the video. The rest of the stuff is like a giveaway and their sign off and pitches for some of their stuff. So anyways, that is the video. So did we learn something new? Are whiskey YouTubers full of crap? I think it's all about perspective, and trying to see people in a positive light, like they're saying, is definitely a core part of it. Understanding diversity exists within a subculture. As people are going to see things quite differently. And just because you don't agree with somebody doesn't mean that they're necessarily wrong or bad or evil. I think their advice is solid in finding some that you vibe with and just sticking with them. Consume a fair amount of content if that's what you're into. But when it comes to trusting a specific whiskey YouTuber or influencer or writer or taster or whatever, just find one or two that you vibe with the most, that you can really trust, and that have palates that are similar to yours. And then you can take that to the bank, right? And then you can take their recommendations more seriously when it comes to spending your hard-earned money. And I'll never be offended if somebody's like, I just don't vibe with this guy when it comes to my content. I know that I am a unique individual person, just like you are. And so we just might not vibe, and that's okay. We don't always have to. In fact, I'm really appreciative of the guys that keep coming back, who consistently tell me that they have a very different palate than I do. I'm like, it's so cool that you consistently watch my content, even though we don't see whiskey the same way. That's actually really neat. But I appreciate each and every one of you who does engage with my content. It does mean the world to me. And they're right, it is a ton of work. It's a lot of editing, script writing, and it's also a lot of investment up front. You talk about equipment, you talk about the whiskeys you're paying for, all that stuff, time investment. Time is money as well. It's time you could be spending clocking in and making money somewhere else, right? So, it is a lot of hard work, and I appreciate anybody who enjoys the content I put out there and the work that I put out. It does mean the world to me. If you want to get involved in our community, there's a link in the description to our Discord, which is totally free to join. You can just come in and see if you vibe with everybody. Pretty vibrant group of folks, constantly talking, sharing pictures of their shells and the things that they're picking up, and offering insights that they've picked up along the way. So come and introduce yourself. We would love to see you and get to know you. Thanks for watching the video. Cheers, my friends. May you live richly and get better with age. And I hope to catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.